Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It only takes just a quick second and it helps out the channel immensely. Let's see if we could reach 3 likes on this one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I do post content just like this all of the time. I very much enjoy what I do and I plan on being here for a very, very long time. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad right after this intro. There won't be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. There was a rule on our ship that everyone had to follow. Never go outside after midnight. Last night, we broke it. Working on a shipping vessel is tough. The physical labor, constant seasickness, and isolation from the outside world take a toll. Some men prefer solitude, but I'm not one of them. Back home, I have a wife and a small girl called Emily, whom I love dearly. I will never get used to seeing their sad faces when I have to leave. It's daunting, but the camaraderie here is something you'll hardly find anywhere else. I'm going off to sleep. Don't go walking around outside, alright? The captain said, smiling. Can't promise that, Cap, James said. They both laughed and the captain walked away. I looked at James in bewilderment. No one told you yet, huh? James said. Tell me what? You can't go outside the bridge area past midnight. What if the fog sets in and your radar stops working? Still ain't going out. Are you messing with me? No, sir. James looked dead serious. That makes no sense, I said. It ain't gotta make sense, but you gonna follow it. What if I have to go out? Then you ain't gonna come back. He bent forward and stared into my eyes. Look, we're in a deep part of the Atlantic. Strange things happen here. Decades before you were born, all the fishermen and crewmen here made a pact. I'm not gonna let you break it. He leaned back and kicked his feet on a chair. How about you tell me about your family? You got one? I tried to get more out of him, but he wouldn't answer. We got to talking about other things, but what he said still loomed in my head. And then I told him not even a whale could eat that much. I burst out laughing. James was slapping his leg, rocking back and forth with laughter. I looked out. The sun was coming up. Another beautiful day at the sea. The seagulls were flying by and the smell of sea salt was in the air. Is it safe to go out now, James? I said and chuckled. James' demeanor changed. The smile was gone from his face and he stared deep into my eyes. Billy, this ain't no laughing matter. He got up, collected his things, and walked to his cabin. The next shift I got there early, excited to spend another night talking with James. He was already sitting in his chair. Her name's Emily. She's just turned 3, I said, showing James my daughter's picture. Ain't she beautiful? Hey, Cap, come take a look. The captain walked over from the control panel and looked down. She really is. She definitely didn't get it from you, Bill. Both he and James started laughing loudly. I laughed too, although a little hurt. This was the first time the captain spoke to me informally. Young Billy here has been asking about the midnight rule. You think it's time you tell him? Why wouldn't I? He's stuck with us here for another 2 weeks. At least he won't do anything stupid. My eyes opened in excitement, and I leaned closer to the captain. James saw it and raised his eyebrow at me. Look, Bill, for a long time, ships that would fish in this part of the Atlantic would lose all their crewmen. The story was always the same. The communication would stop abruptly, and the ship would stay dead in its place. The Coast Guard would then venture out and find an empty vessel, almost as if no one had ever been on it. One day, a young seaman was found hidden inside one of them. He said that the night crew didn't come back the same, and soon murdered everyone. He was the sole survivor. The officers suspected him, but the young man hanged himself soon after. I looked at them in disbelief, but their expressions were ice cold. Do you believe all that? I don't know, Bill. No one knows if what he said was true, but since his story came out, all the ships that fish here stopped letting their crew out at night. It hasn't happened since. Hey, my pa told me the same story. He used to fish around here too. You don't have to believe it, Bill, but respect it. Sure will, Captain. Good. Now, where's that whiskey you got, James? That's what I like to hear, Cap. James walked away to the deck. You and your wife still together, Bill? Yes, Captain. Beautiful. I used to have a wife, too. Unfortunately, things didn't work out. Life at sea doesn't help relationships. You're still young and smart, Bill. Get out while you have the chance. This, coming from the captain, startled me. James, meanwhile, returned with the whiskey and poured each of us a hefty dose. To Bill's family. The captain yelled and chugged down the drink. James quickly followed. The captain stayed with us through the night shift, drinking heavily. When the sun rose, I could barely stand. The captain and James were already waiting in their chairs with shots of whiskey when I came in the next night. Ready for another night, Bill? The captain asked and handed me a drink. Sure thing, Captain. Hey, Cap, Billy Boy is learning. James screamed out and slapped his knee. We were already a few drinks deep when the boat started moving around more. I looked out. My vision was blurred, but I could see storm clouds forming in the sky. Hell of a storm coming, gentlemen, James said. That's a big one, James. Don't you puke on me, Billy, if the boat starts rocking, James said. Only if you don't throw up at me first, I fired back. We all started laughing, but my chest tightened as I glanced out at the storm above the sea. Soon the boat was rocking violently back and forth. I was holding a bucket, throwing up all the whiskey I consumed, barely able to open my eyes. Good thing we got him that bucket, James laughed. But then a strange, loud sound came from outside, like steel being scraped around. Both the captain and James perked up. I could hear the captain mumble, "The gear is moving." They both looked at each other, their eyes wide with terror, and laughter had long left their faces. They both rushed to the window and looked out. James took off his hat and started crumpling it in his hands. "What's the time?" the captain whispered. 12:05, James said quietly. Who hired these incompetent fools? The captain yelled out and threw his hat across the room. He started pacing back and forth, looking down at the ground. Then the scraping again. The whole ship tilted the other way. There was genuine fear in their eyes. The captain looked at the clock again. "Bill, are you fit to operate?" "I guess so," I mumbled. "Okay, James, you and I will go out on the deck and reattach the chains. That should stop the equipment from moving." "Captain, but it's past 12. "I know," the captain screamed out. "But do we have a choice? If we don't do anything, the ship will go down." The captain walked over to the closet, pulled out the raincoats and harnesses, and threw them at James and me. "Let's go." He put on his coat and walked out. Outside, the weather was horrible. Hard, heavy rain with lightning in the distance. The waves crashed hard into the ship, spilling water onto the deck. I had to use all my willpower to hold the puke. We put the harnesses on and clipped in. The captain stayed back to watch and guide our process. Only now did I look at James. Terror was in his eyes. The captain yelled out to move the boxes of equipment to secure the gear, then to take the safety chains and reattach them. We quickly got to work. Each move on the deck felt like hell. Waves kept crashing into the ship, splashing water into our faces. The boxes were heavy. My body was so weak. But James pushed hard and we managed to block the gear for a while. "Get the chains now. The chains," the captain yelled. We took the chains and started reattaching the gear. The chains felt heavy. and reattaching them to the wet floor made it so much harder. I could feel my muscles slowly giving out. James had to rush over and help me attach them. I was so weak that he had to pull me off the ground. "It's done. Get out. Get out." James was already running back. I followed behind him. The captain unfastened the harness and we all walked back, locking the door behind us. We all stood in the hall panting. The air in the ship felt cold. Every piece of my clothing was wet. I slid down to the floor and put my head on my knees. The captain and James were looking at each other, then at me, and back at each other. "Maybe the things ain't like storms," James said. "Yeah, probably," the captain replied. James helped me back up, and we slowly walked towards the bridge area. Each stair felt like a mountain. I walked behind the captain. He now had a very fishy smell. When we got to the bridge area, I sat back in the chair. My mind was empty. The captain was walking around the room, looking at all the shelves and controls. James sat back into his chair, opened up the bottle, and took a chug out of it. "Sorry, couldn't wait." "No problem," the captain replied. James poured out some whiskey for all of us. He tried to hand me the glass, but I declined. My stomach was still recovering. He then gave one to the captain. The captain twirled the drink around, looking at the whiskey under the light, sniffing the glass. A chill ran down my spine. I looked closely at him. He kept examining the liquid. James wasn't paying attention anymore, pouring himself another shot. The captain took a sip and immediately spit it out. "What is this?" His face twisted in disgust. "It's some good whiskey, Cap. Ain't like it no more?" The captain looked at him with one eyebrow raised, then looked down at the ground. "Say, how many men are on this ship?" James' eyes widened and he dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. We both looked at each other and started slowly backing away. "What's the matter?" the captain asked. James?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The captain looked deep into my eyes. His pupils had turned a dark red color. He flashed a smile and ran towards me. He put his hand on my neck and lifted me off the ground. I started choking, trying to fight his hand off, but he was too strong. I looked at James in desperation. He had walked over to the shelf and started frantically searching with his hand until he pulled out a gun. He slowly pointed it up at the captain, his hands shaking. He then pressed down the trigger, but nothing, just a click. James looked down under it. The gun wasn't loaded. Blood froze in my veins. The captain looked back, let out a blood-curdling scream, dropped me to the ground and ran towards James. He pushed him to the ground and started violently scratching and tearing into him with his teeth. My feet were rooted to the ground. Soon his screams turned into a low gurgling and then silence. Only when the thing looked up did I open the door and run down. I could hear the thing's screams echoing through the hall. I'm locked down in the vault of the engine room. The steel door is the only thing keeping me alive. In the first few hours, I had been hearing the screams of crewmates calling out in pain. When the last scream died down, the thing called out to me in the captain's voice, saying it was safe now. I didn't answer. It then started slamming into the door. The vault is shaking with each thud. I have no idea how long it will hold. I'm making this post for my wife and daughter. Even in these tense moments, I'm held up by the thought of them. Please don't forget your father, no matter what happens. We weren't supposed to be there. That wasn't part of the thrill for Evan. He just liked doing things he wasn't supposed to do. Especially when no one was around to tell him to stop. The cemetery was quiet, old, and fenced off after dark, which made it perfect in his eyes. I followed him over the fence because I always did. The gravel paths crunched under our shoes as we walked between the stones. Evan kicked a pebble ahead of him, laughing softly, like we were somewhere harmless. I kept my flashlight low, more focused on where I was stepping than on what surrounded us. "Relax," he said. "It's just a bunch of rocks." I didn't answer. I already regretted coming. The air felt different farther in. Not colder exactly, just heavier. The trees lining the cemetery pressed closer together, their branches tangling overhead. The wind moved through them in uneven bursts, stirring leaves and loose debris along the ground. That was when I first heard it. At first it sounded like the wind catching in the stones, a thin, breathy sound that faded in and out. I ignored it. Cemeteries have a way of amplifying normal noises until they feel like something else. But as we walked, kept coming back. Not loud, not clear, just close enough that I found myself listening for it. "What?" Evan asked when he noticed me slowing. "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. I didn't have anything solid to point to. We reached a section where the graves thinned, opening into a wider stretch of ground. At the far end stood a mausoleum, larger than the others, its stone pale and worn. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar. Evan grinned when he saw it. "Now that's interesting." We walked up to it without hesitation. Shining his light along the surface, I stayed back, telling myself it was just nerves. Just my imagination working overtime. Up close, it was plain. No statues, no carvings worth mentioning. Just a family name etched above the doorway. The letters shone shallow with age. Evan leaned toward the gap in the door, angling his flashlight inside. "Doesn't look like much," he said. I was about to agree when something caught my eye. For a split second, I saw movement at the edge of the opening, pale against the dark. Fingers curled over the stone. A hand. It twitched once, then slid back into the darkness. I sucked in a breath. "Evan?" He turned. "What?" The doorway was empty again. Just shadow. Just stone. I stopped. The words felt stupid the moment they reached my mouth. "Nothing. Never mind." He laughed it off. "You're freaking yourself out." Maybe I was. We moved on, but not far. The paths twisted and looped in ways that made it hard to tell where we were. More than once I glanced back and saw the mausoleum again, closer than I expected. "I thought we'd gone further," I said. "All these rows look the same," Evan replied. "You're fine." Eventually he drifted back toward it without saying it outright. When he stopped in front of the doorway again, something in my chest tightened. "I'm just gonna take a quick look," he said. 2 seconds. "Don't," I said. He was already slipping inside. The sound of him scraping against the stone vanished the moment he crossed the threshold. "Evan?" I called. No answer. I waited, called his name again, louder. Nothing. The cemetery continued like nothing was wrong. Wind in the trees, leaves shifting, normal night sounds that should have been comforting. They weren't. I stood there longer than I meant to, telling myself he was messing with me, that he'd pop out at any second. Then the wind shifted, brushing against my back instead of my face, carrying the dry, stale smell of old stone. I stepped away from the doorway without realizing why. That was when the whispers came back. Not clear, not loud, just fragments, drifting around me instead of from any one place. I called Evan's name again. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed felt intentional. I turned. Evan was standing behind me, close enough that I startled. "There you are," I said, relief hitting me hard. "What the hell was that?" "I'm here," he said. His voice sounded normal, flat maybe, but normal enough that I tried to calm down. I laughed shakily, already preparing to apologize for overreacting. Then I really looked at him. His jacket was dusty along one sleeve. His eyes were open a little wider than usual. He didn't blink. "Did you hear me calling you?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah." "You didn't answer." "I was farther in than I thought." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. "You should come see," he added. "It explains things." "No," I said. "I want to leave." He stepped closer. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I backed up. He adjusted with me, keeping the distance between us the same. His hand brushed my sleeve. Cold, too firm. I pulled away. His grip closed around my wrist. "You're taking too long," he said. That was it. I twisted free and ran. I didn't know where I was going. The cemetery blurred around me, stones flashing past in uneven rows. I didn't hear footsteps behind me. That was worse than being chased. I stopped in a clearing where the graves stood farther apart. That's where I saw them. Figures between the stones. Too tall, too narrow. Watching. And near the mausoleum, Evan, standing upright, too still. My light rose. Hands that weren't his held firm from behind. Fingers sunk deep into his torso to keep him upright. His chest was open. Ribs spread, empty inside. His throat was ruined. His eyes were open and dead. The thing behind him lifted Evan's arm and waved. I ran. I didn't stop until the fence tore my hands and the streetlights burned my eyes. No one followed me. They let me leave. I still don't know why. Every night at exactly 8:35, my father would secure the front door, the lock on the knob, 2 locks up top, one with a chain, another a latch, a child-proof doorknob cover, and last of all, a door stopper was wedged as far beneath it as he could manage. No minute too late, no minute too early. It was a ritualistic chore, one my mother used to just shrug off with a, "Your father just likes being safe." I remember the first time I'd caught him doing it. It was 8:35, and I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard shouting from down the hall. "What have I always told you, woman? 8:35. Jim, please. I let you do this idiotic ritual every night for 9 years. Don't you dare yell at me." "Well, I wouldn't have to if you'd listen. It needs to be done at 35, not 33. Undo that goddamn lock." A huff of frustration was quickly followed by the jingle of various locks before the door creaked open. "I just can't with you tonight." The shuffle of fabric. "I'm going out for a walk." "Irene, do not go out there. They'll come after you, and I won't go out there to save you." "I'll take my chances." "Irene." The door slammed shut behind my mother just as I crept out from the hallway. I saw my father give the door an angry stare before he whipped around with a grumble about needing a drink. He began to stomp away to the kitchen before noticing me in the shadows. The anger from before drained instantly. "Hey, buddy, you're supposed to be sleeping." My arms tightened around the stuffed toy in them. "I heard yelling. Is Mommy okay?" My father sighed. "Your mother she needed some time to herself." "Is she going to be okay?" A pause. I watched his face sadden. "I don't know, buddy." My face paled. The toy fell from my arms. My father seemed to sense the shift in the air, and quickly dropped to one knee so his hands could wrap over my shoulders. "Hey, it's going to be okay. Your mom's a fighter. If anyone can survive out there, it's her." "Survive?" Lips pulled back in a grimace, his hands tightened for only a moment before falling away as he rose to his feet. Did I say survive? No, I meant, The words died on my father's tongue as a melody began to play from his back pocket. I watched as his face went white as a sheet before heavy footsteps barreled in the direction of the front door. Each lock clicked into place at rapid speed thanks to muscle memory. I walked up to my father just as he was starting to kick the door stopper into place. "Daddy, what's going on? Isn't Mommy still outside?" "Not now, buddy." After one last kick, he began to run around the house, shutting off every light and pulling closed every curtain. When the house was well secured, my father scooped me into his arms and carried me to the couch where he dropped onto it with a grunt. "Dad?" A large hand covered my mouth before I could try to say anything else. Frustrated, I tried to lift my arms, but they were bound against my sides by my father's own, which held me securely against his chest. My head strained to look back, my legs kicked at the air. I opened my mouth to scream just against his palm when I heard it. Rattle, click, rattle. My father held me tighter as prayers fell from his mouth. "Heavenly Father, I come to you in the name of Jesus, acknowledging your power and sovereignty." Rattle, rattle. "I pray for your divine protection over me and my loved ones. Surround us with your angels and create a hedge of safety around us." A knock. "Jim?" I felt my father shift from behind me, felt the hand over my mouth loosen. "Jim, this isn't funny. Open this door right now." "Mommy?" As soon as the word left my mouth, the hand was back against it. My father shuffled us further against the back of the couch. "Guard us from harm, both seen and unseen, and keep us secure in your loving care." "Jim!" My mother knocked angrily at the door. "Won't you just... oh, hello. Hi. Could you help me?" I could feel tears wetting the back of my neck. "I trust in your promise that no weapon formed against us shall prosper." "My husband locked me out of the house. If you could just... wait. No, stop. Get away from me." "In Jesus' name I pray. I pray." The door shook like something had been thrown against it. The world fell silent as my mother's screams and begs for mercy echoed into the night, mixing with the soft sound of my father crying into my hair. I was in shock. What sort of monster was currently taking my mother from me? Why wasn't anyone helping? Why weren't we helping? Amen, 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 amen. We held her funeral 2 weeks later. It was a small thing. My aunts and uncles, a few cousins, and my grandparents who babysat me while my father attended to everything. There was no body to put in the casket, so we placed a few of my mom's most precious possessions in her place. An old music box from her parents, a pair of shoes from when I was a baby, and a framed photo of our family. I remember small parts of the event, mainly how people yelled and scolded my father for not doing something, for hiding like a coward while my mom was out there all alone. He didn't fight back. He just sat in one of the foldable chairs with the most defeated look on his face. That was 15 years ago. Since then, my father has been different, quiet and skittish, like a baby deer. I was pulled out of school and was taught exclusively at home. I didn't have many friends, and the few I had could only come to my house. I couldn't go to theirs. But no one wants to come to the house of the kid whose dad checks on him every half hour, whose dad has over 20 locks on the front door, and just as many on the windows, whose dad insisted every bedroom door be open at all times, so if anything happened he could get there as soon as possible, whose dad was afraid of losing what little family he had left. But I'm 24 now. I have a girlfriend, somehow. One who understands my father to the best of her abilities. She never questioned our small practices, and always respected his 3 house rules. 1, Always come over before 8 p.m. 2. Never unlock the doors or windows until at least 9 in the morning. 3. Always say nightly prayers before bed. We were supposed to meet for lunch, but something had happened at her job, so we postponed it until later that night. My father was more than happy to have her over, and spent a good few hours preparing dinner. I could see him giving the clock a glance every time he walked past it. Could see the way his hands began to twitch with nervousness the closer the clock's hands got to 7, and when they finally reached 8:15, he was in full panic mode. "Maybe you two should reschedule for tomorrow," he said while pulling back the window curtain to peek out at the street. "Dad, it's okay. Elowen sent me a text that she was on her way like 5 minutes ago." "But the building is at least 20 minutes away. What if there's traffic? An accident? You have to call her and tell her to go straight home." "Dad." "Son, please." He turned to me, eyes wide with terror. Trembling hands grasped the front of my shirt. "Call her." I hadn't heard my father talk like that in a long time. The way his words trembled like he was on the verge of tears. The layer of fear that clung to him like barbed wire. I hadn't heard him speak like that since the night my mother passed. So I nodded, took out my phone and called Elowen. The phone rang 3 times before her voice crackled to life on the other end. "Charlie?" "Elowen, how far are you from my house?" "I don't know, like maybe 13 minutes. Why, what's wrong?" "Okay, I need you to get over here now, or try to get to your parents' place. Just race over to either one." "What, like go over the speed limit?" "If you have to." "Charlie, I'm not breaking the law." "I don't care about the law, just..." I felt my father tug the phone from my hand and turned just in time to see him put it to his ear. "Elowen, you listen to me right now." "No, you are gonna shut up and listen." He glared briefly in my direction before looking at the floor. "This isn't a game. It's life or death. Now, you are gonna put your foot on the pedal and get over to a house." I tried to reach for the phone, but my father pressed his hand to my chest to keep me back. I could hear Elowen's voice on the other end shout briefly in anger before it settled. Another minute passed before he finally relaxed. "Thank you. Now, I'm serious. You hurry over here, and if you can't get here in time, just lock the car and lay on the floor in the back. I'll pray for you." She said something, probably a thank you or a goodbye, before he hung up and tossed the phone onto the nearby couch. He let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand through graying hair. "She's on her way." A beat of silence. His smile was weak. "Come on, let's get something in our bellies before she gets here. I made a good pot roast." It's 8:34 now. She's not here. I was pacing around the living room, pinky nail caught between teeth. My eyes kept drifting to the front door where my father stood, waiting for the alarm on his phone to chime. But we couldn't do the locks. We just couldn't. Not with Elowen still out there. I grabbed my coat and walked to the door, but my hand was smacked just as it reached for the knob. "Ow, Dad, what the hell?" "Don't even think about it. It's 1 minute till 35. "Yeah, and Elowen's still out there. I have to go get her." "No, you don't. If she's smart, she'll do what I said and stay in the car. All we can do is wait until morning." "Like hell. I'm going to get her." I tried to push past him, but my father elbowed me in the chest and knocked me onto my butt. I barely had time to register what happened before that familiar melody began to play, and he started shifting the locks into place. I was able to reach out and grab onto his pant leg before he could start kicking in the door stopper. "Dad, please. We can't leave her out there." I could barely make out the shift in his expression, the way his brows met and his lips pulled downwards. He didn't want to leave her to the beast outside. He didn't want to risk her having the same fate as my mother. I know he wanted to go out there, but he didn't. Instead, he placed a gentle hand to the top of my head and pushed. My back hit the floor as the sounds of him Kicking the doorstop echoed off the walls. My chest felt hollow. My body felt like it was made of steel. I prayed silently in my head for Eloin's protection and for forgiveness. I know I didn't deserve it. I was leaving her like a sheep in a den full of wolves. But I knew the dangers. My father knew the dangers. I could only hope that she understood it too. Charlie? My father bent at my side. Let's go say our prayers. I don't remember how he got me off the floor and to the table, but suddenly I was sitting across from him and watching him light a lavender-scented candle. My favorite. Once the candle was lit, he set the lighter down and brought his hands together over the table. A few seconds passed before he gave an encouraging smile. Do you want to do the prayer today? I didn't say anything. I just put my hands together and closed my eyes. Lord, we pray for the safety and protection of our family members. Keep us safe from harm and lead us. Rattle. My father's chair squeaked as he moved. I cleared my throat. Lead us in the paths of righteousness. Knock, knock. Charlie. The chair fell over as I stood, eyes opening to stare in the direction of the front door. Eloin? I heard my father stand up. Charlie, I'm here. Open the door. I'm coming. Just hold on. I made a run for the door, but my father was quick to grab the back of my shirt. Limbs flailed as I fell back. Let go of me. Eloin. His hands covered my mouth as I tried to scream out to her, to let her know that I hadn't forgotten her, that I wouldn't let anything happen to her. Charlie, stop. He hissed as I threw myself around in an attempt to loosen his grip. He only held on tighter. You can't. Charlie, please. I know I'm late. I'm sorry, but let me... Oh, hello. We both froze, listening in as Eloin spoke to whatever was out there with her. I could hear the fear in her words growing stronger as she knocked desperately on the door one last time. When her scream broke, though, I panicked. My head reeled back to uncover my mouth before it opened to bite down against my father's thumb. He yelped in pain as I bit down harder, enough to draw blood. The metallic taste coated my tongue as he dropped me to clutch his hand in pain. Me? I bolted to the door. I'm coming, Eloin. I shouted while kicking at the door stopper, until it came loose and skidded across the floor. I pulled back each lock and cupped the cover with both hands to throw open the door. I was going to run out in some heroic act of bravery, but one foot was barely out the door before I froze in place. Out on the porch was Eloin, cornered against the railing with a pocket knife in her hand. One of her eyes was squeezed shut and bleeding. 5 long scratches running along it to her jaw. She looked in my direction and whimpered, mouthing the words, "Help me." The person? No, monster above her, slowly turned to me. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its knees were bent backwards, and the arms went all the way down to the floor. Its body was entirely black, like you were looking into a void. It was also entirely naked, though it wasn't like you were able to see anything because, again, it was black. But it had a mask, a plastic one where you could only see the eyes, which seemed to glow an ominous red, and they were looking right at me. The creature made a soft clicking noise as its body turned fully, clawed hands dragging along the porch, its head cocked to the side like a curious bird as I took a step back into the house. I could hear my father somewhere behind me running to the other end, probably to get a weapon, hopefully to get a weapon. Meanwhile, I was stuck with this thing that was slowly coming towards me. In a panic, my hands shot out in a stop motion. Get out of here, I shouted, stomping my foot once like I was trying to scare away a wild animal. Stay away from us. To be fair, it did stop for about 5 seconds. Then it lunged, knocking me onto the ground so hard I could feel the breath in my lungs give out. It didn't attack, though. It hovered over me like a beast, letting out short clicks as its mask twitched and pressed against the sides of my face, like it was searching for something. I tried to lift my arms to push it off, but it was quick to restrain them above my head. I tried to shout, but the words died in my throat. All I could do was watch as those horrid eyes met mine once more. It clicked. One hand dragged up to the mask and lifted it. Its face was just as empty as the rest of it, the only exception being the two beady red eyes that refused to look away. Another click. I leaned in and nudged its face against my mouth. I watched as those same eyes grew wider in horrifying delight. It smelled blood. My dad's blood. The blood currently drying on my chin. My eyes widened in fear as I watched it sit up above me, its clicks making a melody that almost sounded like laughter. A line formed on its face and slowly opened. A mouth, one filled with razor-sharp teeth and a split tongue that danced in the air. My body trembled as it freed my arms to grab my face. My hands shot out to press against its chest as my mouth was forced open. I tried to scream, but it was blocked out by the monster's tongue, forcing into my mouth and down my throat. They worked to slide along every crevice, making sure no speck of blood was left unnoticed. I could only thrash beneath it, kicking and clawing at skin that felt like cold metal. My eyes burned with salty tears, and I could feel bile working its way up just to be stopped by the appendages in its way. I started growing limbs. My muscles burned and my mouth tasted like sulfur. I'm sure it had gotten it all, that I had nothing left to give, but it persisted, claws digging into the side of my head as it forced my mouth to open wider. My eyes started to shut. I gave up. Hey. The monster stilled. I felt its tongues slowly retract. Get the hell off my boy. A gun cocked. Bang. My body lurched as the monster was thrown off me. I heard it hit the opposite wall. It gave one last click, then fell silent. My eyes opened to find my father hovering above me with a shotgun in his hands. Charlie, can you hear me, buddy? I groaned, rolling onto my back. Dad, you own a gun? Of course I do. He chuckled and shifted the gun into one hand so the other could reach down. My own hand lifted, fingers barely brushing his before a light clicking came from the side. Our heads turned just in time to see the creature rising on bent legs. Its claws scratched against the mask laying on the floor, one finger hooking against the string on the back to lift it in the air. Red eyes locked onto my father, who was already reloading the shotgun. Do your worst, you son of a bitch. He cocked the gun, aimed, and fired. A short screech left the creature as it knocked back against the wall for a second time. It recovered quickly, though, pulling the mask over its face before rushing at my father, who was trying to get another shot in. I scrambled to my feet as it knocked him down, claws sinking into forearm. He screamed in pain, fist pounding against the side of its face as he cursed at it. I ran for the shotgun. My fingers managed to brush the handle before I was knocked back by a clawed hand, the same hand that came around my throat as I hit the wall, lifting me so my feet dangled. It hissed from behind the mask, pulling me forward before slamming me back against the wall. It pulled for a second time before it screeched as Elowen drove her knife into its shoulder. It threw me as it turned, and my head hit the corner at the hallway. I could hear my name being shouted as everything went black. The sun was barely cresting over the horizon when I finally woke up. My head throbbed as I forced myself onto my feet, eyes scanning the living room. Dad? I forced myself down the hallway, peeking into rooms and switching on lights that made my eyes feel like they were bleeding. Elowen? No response. I made my way back to the living room where the front door was wide open and barely hanging on to the hinges. The porch was covered with scratch marks and streaks of blood. But that's where it ended. No trail, no sign, just two abandoned cars in the driveway. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to drive myself to the hospital before I could pass out a second time. The doctor said I was lucky to have survived such an attack. Most people didn't. I asked if they could contact the police. I needed to put out a watch for my dad and girlfriend. They could still be out there, and that thing needed to be killed. She refused. She just patted me on the shoulder with an unconvincing look of sympathy and told me to move on. I tried to argue, tried to say that they could still be alive, but she brushed me off. She said she'd seen lots of people like me, people that refused to believe it, refused to let those monsters get away with snatching up the ones they loved. After an hour of begging, she finally called the cops, but not for my family. For me. She said they had a program for victims of attacks, a home where we could live with similar folk, recount our stories, and learn to be ones with society again. She even gave me this dumb brochure, but I tore it up when she left. I don't need a brochure or some kind of rehab center. I need my family. So I left. I slipped out when she went to go check on another patient and bolted to the bus station. From what I've heard, the cops completely blocked off my house, which leaves me with nothing but my bloody clothes from last night, and enough bus money to get me across town. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I know that I'm going to look for my family. My dad spent my whole life protecting me from that monster, and if there's even a chance they're still alive, I'm going to do the same. Keep your doors locked. And if you're stupid enough not to, then you better learn how to fight. You'll lose, but at least you won't make it easy. I've been the voice on the air for 6 years, though Weatherman feels like a title I stole. My scripts arrive via an ancient thermal fax machine bolted to the corner of my desk. It has no phone line. The power cord sits coiled on the floor like a dead snake. Yet it screams to life. The paper it spits out is always cold. Colder than the room. I don't remember how I even got this job. I don't remember the interview. I don't remember the application. I only remember the phone ringing in the middle of a dream and a voice telling me I started Monday. Now I sit in the booth from sunrise to sunset, reading whatever the machine spits out. Someone has to tell them what's coming. Someone has to give them a chance to run. Most days, the machine, I call it the specialist, just groans. It hums with a low-frequency vibration that makes my teeth ache, eventually spitting out a tongue of thermal paper that reeks of scorched oil and old electricity. On the good days, the messages are boring. Light drizzle, partly cloudy, the kind of news that lets me pretend I'm just a guy with a job. But then there are the other days. The specialist doesn't just hum on those days. It screams. It's a mechanical seizure. The sound of paper, shredder, choking on bone, and the high-pitched wail of a dying cat. When the paper finally slides out, the ink is still wet and oily. The paper feels like skin peeled from someone fresh out of the shower. I remember the first time the forecast changed. It didn't mention the sky at all. Heavy mist for the next 2 hours. If you hear knocking at your door, do not open it. Do not ask who is there. Or, thunderstorms rolling in. If you see a dead relative in a reflection, do not acknowledge them. They are looking for an invitation. I have to read those words into the microphone. I have to keep my voice steady, even when I can feel the specialist watching the back of my head, waiting to see if I'll miss a syllable. Because out there, in the quiet houses and moving cars, people are listening, and I'm the only one telling them how to survive. I'm not entirely alone in the station, though it often feels that way. There's Ricky and Ashley. Ashley handles the local news and community updates. She's giddy. Too giddy. She moves through the dim hallways with a chirpy, caffeinated energy that feels like a serrated blade against the silence of the booth. She brings me coffee, black, bitter and smelling slightly of the same burnt oil as the fax machine. But she never looks at the specialist. She never asks why my weather reports sound like survival manuals. She just smiles, her teeth a little too white in the fluorescent light, and tells me to keep up the good work. Then there's Rick. Rick is the ghost in the machine. He's the one who keeps the lights from flickering out and the plumbing from backing up into the lobby. He's a man of grease stains and heavy sighs. We don't talk much, which suits me. He just moves from the peripheral of my vision, tightening bolts on things that shouldn't be loose and watching the walls with a wary, exhausted intensity. They fill the gaps between my broadcasts, providing a thin veneer of office life. But sometimes, when the specialist starts its rhythmic, bone-grinding shriek, I catch them both freezing, just for a second. Ashley's smile will falter, and Rick will grip his wrench and his knuckles turn gray. It was a Tuesday, indistinguishable from any other. I stepped into the booth, a cramped box that smelled of static and dust, and gave the specialist a soft pat on its cold beige casing. It was my morning ritual, a way of acknowledging the beast before it woke up. Ashley fluttered in a moment later, clutching 2 foam cups. Her cheerfulness felt loud in the small space, like a radio played at the wrong frequency. "Ready for another fun day?" she asked, her smile pinned perfectly in place. "I guess you could call it that," I replied. The coffee she handed me was scalding, the steam curling into the air like a ghost. "Oh, Thomas," she giggled, backing toward the door. "I know there's a soft spot behind all that stone." I managed a faint roll of my eyes as she vanished back into the hallway, left alone with the hum of the electronics. I turned to the window. It was one part of the job I actually liked. The parking lot was small, a gray patch of asphalt carved out of the dense, encroaching tree line. From here, I could watch the single road that bled into the forest. On mornings like this, with the mist clinging to the tops of the pines, it looked peaceful, but it was a fragile kind of peace. The kind you find in a graveyard before the first shovel hits the dirt. The trees stood so still they didn't look like wood and needles. They looked like a crowd of people standing perfectly silent, waiting for me to turn my back. I settled the headset over my ears, the plastic cool against my temples. In the background, Ashley's voice filtered through the monitors, bubbly, rhythmic, and utterly disconnected from the cold reality of the booth. I tuned her out. I was waiting for the only sound that mattered. Then it came. The specialist didn't just print, it convulsed. A sharp metallic shriek ripped through the room, the sound of a blade dragging across a chalkboard. A fresh tongue of thermal paper slid out, curling toward the floor. I grabbed it, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I leaned into the mic, giving it 2 soft taps. Thump, thump, like a heartbeat. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice dropping into that smooth practice tone. "Tom is here with the weather. It's going to be a gloomy one today. Expect light drizzling throughout the morning, with cooler temperatures moving in from the north." I read it word for word. I didn't breathe until the sentence was finished. I never dared to ad-lib, never dared to summarize. Even a normal report felt like a contract. If the specialist said drizzle, I said drizzle. If I changed a word, if I called it a shower instead of rain, I had the sickening feeling that the world outside would twist itself to fit my mistake, and I didn't want to be responsible for the sound of that snapping. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the slow crawl of shadows across the parking lot. No further updates shrieked from the specialist. It sat silent, a beige tombstone on my desk, radiating a dull, electric heat. Between her segments, Ashley leaned against my doorframe, chatting about nothing. Local bake sales, a new song on the charts, the trivialities of a world that felt increasingly distant. We kept it light. We had to. Later than usual, Rick shuffled past the booth. He carried a heavy toolbox that clanked with a sound of rusted iron, his eyes fixed on a spot an inch above the floorboards. I didn't ask why he was late. He didn't explain. It was our unspoken contract, signed in the silence of the station. We didn't talk about the boss no one had ever met. We didn't compare notes on the phantom phone calls that had plucked us out of our lives and dropped us behind these desks. There was a comfort in ignorance. If I didn't ask Ashley how she got here, she wouldn't have to ask me why I was reading survival instructions to a city that thought I was just talking about the rain. We were three strangers holding our breath in the dark, pretending that if we just did our jobs, if Rick kept the pipes from screaming and I kept the script perfect, the dark wouldn't notice us. So Thomas, I was wondering if maybe you wanted to go to the farmer's market this Saturday. Ashley's voice was different. The high-pitched, radio-ready giddiness had dipped into something softer, something fragile. She was looking at her shoes, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. It was the first time in years she'd acknowledged a world existing outside the four walls of this station. Sure, I replied, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. Why not? I told myself it was just the loneliness finally leaking through her armor. She looked up and for a second, her smile wasn't a mask. It was real, bright enough to make the dim booth feel almost warm. Wonderful, she beamed, a genuine spring in her step as she turned the corner. I can't wait. I watched her go, actually feeling a phantom twitch of a smile myself. I'd pick her up a coffee tomorrow morning, a real one, from the place down the road, not the burnt sludge we drank here. I let myself imagine the sun on a Saturday morning. Then the specialist screamed. It wasn't the usual screech. It was a prolonged, wet sound, like a saw blade hitting a knot of gristle. The air in the booth suddenly turned frigid, the scent of burnt oil replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of an approaching storm. The machine didn't just print. It shook the entire desk, vomiting out a strip of paper that looked charred around the edges. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what kind of weather required a sound like that, but someone had to tell them. Someone had to try to save their lives. I reached for the paper, my fingers trembling. The heat coming off it felt like a fever. I smoothed it out on the desk and leaned into the microphone. My voice felt thin, a fragile thread of sound in the sudden, heavy silence of the station. Attention, listeners. I began, my eyes scanning the jagged text. Update for the overnight hours. We're looking at a sudden temperature inversion. A thick, localized fog will begin rolling in from the tree line starting at 10 p.m. Expect near zero visibility. I paused. The next line wasn't about barometric pressure or wind shear. It was printed in a larger, shakier font. The fog will carry the sound of a child crying for help. Do not go outside. Do not shine a light into the mist to find them. If the crying starts to sound like your own voice, cover your ears and stay away from the windows until sunrise. I sat there, the on-air light bleeding red across my knuckles. I thought of Ashley, her pep, and her Saturday plans. I thought of the road leading out of the parking lot, currently being swallowed by a gray, unnatural tide. The specialist gave one final wet click, a sound like a tongue snapping against the roof of a mouth, and went cold. 6 o'clock arrived with the heavy, mechanical thud of the station's clock. I caught Ashley and Rick by the heavy steel exit door. The fog, I said, my voice sounding raspy even to my own ears. Remember the report. Stay inside. Don't look for the source of the noise. They both nodded. Ashley's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, thin line of apprehension. Rick didn't even look at me. He just adjusted the strap of his heavy toolbox and pushed out into the evening. For the first time in 6 years, the unspoken contract felt like it was fraying at the edges. I cared if they made it home. I cared if I saw them tomorrow. When I stepped out, the air didn't hit me. It swallowed me. The fog wasn't a mist. It was a physical weight, tasting of wet ash and static. It clung to my skin, instantly soaking through my coat. The specialist's accuracy was a jagged blade, perfect and cold. I could barely see the hood of my car 10 feet away. Through the shifting gray curtains, I saw Rick. He was standing by the open door of the rusted truck, but he wasn't getting in. He was staring back at the radio station, his silhouette stunted and lonely in the haze. He looked smaller than usual, his shoulders slumped under a grief I couldn't name. I raised a hand to call out to him, to ask if he was okay, but the words died in my throat. The fog between us seemed to thicken, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that didn't come from any street lamp. Before I could find my voice, Rick climbed into the cab. The door shut with a hollow, final sound, and his taillights bled into the mist like two fading embers before vanishing entirely. I stood there in the silence, my hand still half raised, listening, and then, from somewhere deep in the tree line, I heard it. The first faint, thin wail of a child. I ignored the sounds in the fog. It's a skill I've perfected over 6 years. The ability to lock my empathy in a box and keep walking. By the time I reached my front door, the world was silent again. The specialist's rules only seem to apply when you're standing on its ground. The next morning the world looked scrubbed clean. The fog had vanished as if it had never been, leaving the trees sharp and vivid against a pale sky. I left early, the engine of my car humming a cheerful tone as I pulled into the drive-thru of a local cafe. I bought 2 coffees, a plain black for myself and something lighter, sweeter for Ashley. The warmth of the cups against my palm felt like a promise. I was actually looking forward to the station. I wanted to see her face when she saw the drink. I wanted to believe that people had listened to my voice last night, that they had stayed inside, covered their ears, and ignored the phantom cries in the mist. The coffee cups sat in the passenger seat, the sweet scent of Ashley's vanilla latte filling the car. I pulled into the station lot, my mind on the Saturday market, on the sun, on anything but the radio. Then the tires hit something soft, a wet, heavy thwack that didn't sound like a pothole. I slammed on the brakes. My stomach turned a cold somersault as I looked through the windshield. The parking lot wasn't gray anymore. It was a mosaic of raw, glistening meat and tangled limbs. They weren't just dead. They had been unmade. A dozen figures lay scattered across the asphalt, but the geometry was all wrong. I saw a man whose torso had been elongated and coiled like a length of garden hose. His ribs snapped outward to form a jagged ivory cage. Next to him, a woman had been fused to the trunk of a pine tree. Her skin stretched so thin it was translucent, revealing the frantic, pulsing machinery of organs that shouldn't have still been working. But it was the faces that made me scream behind my teeth. Their mouths were pulled open in impossible, yawning vertical ovals. The skin of their cheeks ripped back to the jawbone. Their eyes weren't just wide. The lids had been removed, leaving bulging, bloodshot spheres that stared at nothing. They looked exactly like the hollow-eyed agony of the scream, but rendered in shivering, wet muscle and bruised fat. The worst part was the sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, bubbling whistle coming from those cavernous mouths, the sound of air escaping through ruined windpipes. They were still breathing. The fog hadn't finished the job. It had just changed their shape. In the center of the carnage, I saw a familiar blue jacket. Rick. His body had been flattened down as if all his bones were removed. His neck was stretched out like taffy wrapped around his rusty toolbox. I walked through the asphalt, and the ground felt spongy. I tried not to look down, but the squelch beneath my boots forced my eyes to the pavement. I hadn't stepped on a stone. I had stepped on a tongue, a long gray ribbon of muscle that trailed out from a pile of what used to be a local delivery driver. It was still twitching, tasting the air, even though the rest of the man was a flattened husk of shattered bone and burst intestines. I walked toward the entrance, my breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. To my left, two figures had been woven together. Their limbs had been braided like dough. The skin fused so seamlessly that I couldn't tell where one person ended and the other began. They looked like a human knot, a sculpture of purple bruising and exposed sinew. One of them turned a head that was mostly just a gaping, toothless smile, and a thick, yellow fluid leaked from its ear as it tried to moan. It sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. I passed the bike rack, where a teenager was draped like a wet towel. His spine had been removed. God knows how, and his limp body was knotted through the metal bars. His eyes, fixed and glassy, followed me. He was nothing but a bag of fluid and meat now. Yet his fingers continued to drum a rhythmic, mindless beat against the metal. Tap, tap, tap. I reached the heavy steel doors of the station. My hand hovered over the handle, which was coated in a thin, translucent film of mucus. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I wiped my hands on my pants, gripped the slime-slicked handle, and pulled. Ashley was hunched over her desk, a small, trembling heap of floral print fabric and terror. Her breathing was a series of wet, hitching gasps, and her eyes were fixed on these security monitors, the small, grainy screens that showed the mosaic I had just walked through. I called the police already, she stammered, her voice a fragile whistle. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. I am so scared, Thomas. The bodies. Oh, God. The bodies in the light. They're still moving. I just set the sweet, vanilla-scented coffee on the corner of her desk. The steam rose in a gentle plume, smelling of a world that no longer existed. I leaned down and gave her a kind, practiced smile. The sort of smile a mortuary director gives to the grieving. I gave her a small, stiff nod of encouragement. "Drink up, Ashley," I said softly. "It's going to be a long day." She looked at the cup as if I'd handed her a severed head. I didn't stay to see if she drank it. I had a schedule to keep. I turned and walked to my booth, my boots leaving faint, reddish-brown smears on the linoleum. The specialist was vibrating so violently now that the pens on my desk were dancing. The shriek it was emitting had shifted into something rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The moment the booth door clicked shut, the world went silent. The violent tremors of the desk ceased, and the specialist sat bathed in the soft, clinical glow of my desk lamp. It looked almost innocent. Then it fed me the morning's work. First came a strip of standard thermal paper, white and sterile. I looked at it. Sunny, high of 78, a perfect, golden day for the town. I looked out the window and my breath hitched. The parking lot was empty. The mosaic of meat, the braided limbs, the yawning faces, all gone. Even the blood had been licked clean from the asphalt. The sun was shining with a cruel, blinding brightness that made the morning slaughter feel like a fever dream. Then the machine stuttered one last time and pushed out the second sheet. It didn't slide out. It slumped. It was a square of pale, cured leather, still warm and slightly damp. The edges were jagged, showing the faint, rhythmic marks of a serrated blade. There were no ink ribbons here. The words had been raised in welts, like a rash forming under the surface of the skin. "Do not Let the weather in, Thomas. I didn't scream. I couldn't afford to. I set the skin face down on the desk, unable to look at the texture of it any longer. I reached for my headset, the plastic feeling alien and cold against my skin. My hands were steady. Too steady. I leaned toward the microphone. The on-air light bled a deep, arterial red across my knuckles. I tapped the mesh. Thump, thump. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice as bright and hollow as the sun outside. "Tom is here. And now, for the weather." I hadn't been back to my grandmother's house since I was a teenager. I didn't realize how long it had been until my mom mentioned it over the phone. Back then, she still made me go with her. Long drives and long nights in a house that always felt like it was swallowed by the swamp. Somewhere along the way, the visits just stopped. Life got in the way. My mom called me on a Tuesday evening. "She's still living out there by herself," she said, "and she isn't doing like she used to." Grandma had been widowed for 10 years. Grandpa passed quietly in his sleep, and she never left that house after. Neighbors came by to check on her, bring groceries, help with chores, but she wouldn't move. "The land won't let me," she told my mom once, and I never really understood what she meant. "She's been asking about you," my mom said. "You should go see her." So I did. The drive from New Orleans took longer than I remembered. Street lights got fewer and fewer until they disappeared. The paved roads turned into dirt roads that got narrower the farther I went. The swamp felt like it was pressing close on both sides. Spanish moss hung from the trees, heavy and still. Water puddled in the low spots. The smell of mud and wet plants stuck to the air and my clothes. I had to park my car about half a mile from her house. The road past that point had turned into mud so soft it would have swallowed my car. I grabbed my bag and started walking. My shoes sank a little with each step, and the wet smell of the swamp stayed in my nose. Her house was at the edge of the water, lifted on cinder blocks so it looked like it was floating above the swamp. A narrow wooden dock stretched out from the porch into the dark water. I could hear it creak under the wind. The house itself looked smaller than I remembered, like it had been settling into the swamp for decades. She opened the door herself. She was thinner than I remembered and bent in ways that made me worry, but her eyes were still sharp. She leaned on the door frame and reached for me. She stood long enough to hug me, her hands gripping my shirt like she needed to make sure I was real. "Lord, child, you done let the years slip by," she said, her tone in that classic grandma nag. "I didn't forget," I told her. She laughed softly. That's what they all say." Inside, the house smelled like old wood and dried herbs, with something sharp underneath it all. The curtains were drawn even though it was still daylight. I noticed little things without really thinking about them. White lines near the door frame, a small cloth bundle pinned high on the wall where only the eyes could reach it. I didn't ask about them. Something told me not to. That night, after the neighbors had gone and the swamp swallowed the sun, the sounds came alive. Frogs called across the water. Insects buzzed thick in the air. Somewhere deep in the distance, an alligator bellowed, long and low, the sound rolling through the ground like it was alive under my feet. Grandma sat in her chair, listening. "They stirred up tonight," she said. "It's just noise," I said. "Same as always." She looked at me for a long moment. "Baby," she said, "you ain't been here long enough to know what always sound like." I laughed lightly. I thought she was just teasing me like she used to. I'm not laughing about it now. That night I couldn't sleep. The heat from the day hadn't left, and the air was thick with cicadas. screaming so loud it felt like it was shaking the walls. Somewhere in the swamp, water splashed against something. Maybe a branch, maybe a fish. I kept turning over in bed, listening, but the sounds only made it worse. I got up to grab a glass of water, hoping it would settle me. The hallway was dark, the floorboards creaking under my weight. I stepped out onto the porch, the night thick around me. The deck smelled like wet wood and moss, the swamp smelling sharper than it had during the day. I leaned against the railing and tried to breathe. That's when I saw it, a little glint of light, far out in the water reflecting the moon. I squinted. It was down there at the bottom, just barely visible through the dark water. I leaned closer, curiosity winning over caution. It looked like some kind of pendant, maybe old and made of brass or silver, tangled in weeds. I reached for it, and then I froze. A low bellow rolled out from the water, deep and menacing. My heart jumped. I whipped my head toward the sound. From the far edge of the swamp, something massive moved through the dark water. A bull gator, thick and huge, pushed itself into the shallow part near the deck. Its head broke the surface. Glinting eyes catching the moonlight, the water rippled as it moved, slow and deliberate, like it knew I was there. I tried to step back, planning to get away from the edge, but one of the deck planks groaned and gave out under me. I fell through. Water hit me fast and cold. I was never a good swimmer. I kept thinking about that gator, just below me somewhere, waiting. Somehow I was able to grab the deck and pull myself up. I looked down at the hole where the plank had broken. The bull gator slid past slowly, scales glinting under the moon, just where I had fallen. My hands shook and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I went back inside, dripping and shivering. Grandma was in the kitchen calling out my name. "You all right, baby?" she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp when she saw me. Yeah, I'm fine," I said, dripping water onto the floor. She shook her head, a little smile on her lips. "Those planks are going to give out someday anyway. It's all right. Go get yourself changed." I did as she said, but I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound from the swamp kept me awake. The cicadas, the water, something moving just beyond sight. I kept thinking about that pendant at the bottom and the bull gator, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only just begun to notice how alive the swamp really was. The next morning, Grandma sent me into town. She gave me a short list written in shaky handwriting: milk, bread, her blood pressure medicine, and the kind of coffee she liked, even though the doctor told her not to drink it anymore. The town was small, just a single grocery store, a gas station, and a few buildings that looked like they had been there longer than anyone alive. The drive was quiet. Trees crowded the road on both sides, and the swamp followed me most of the way, water flashing between trunks. I felt better being away from the house, like I could finally breathe again. The city had taught me to trust noise. Silence always made me uneasy. The grocery store was cool inside, the air smelling like old fruit and cleaner. There were only a few people shopping, all of them quiet, moving slow. I grabbed what was on Grandma's list and headed to the counter. That's when I noticed the clerk's necklace. It was small, hanging on a thin chain, but I knew it right away. The shape was the same as the pendant I had seen in the swamp. Same curves, same strange markings carved into it. My stomach dropped. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "That necklace, where'd you get it?" The clerk stopped moving. He didn't look up at first. Then his eyes lifted and locked onto mine. They were flat, empty, like he was looking through me instead of at me. For a second I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. I opened my mouth to repeat myself, but before I could, he rang up my items and said my total. His voice was normal, calm, like nothing had happened. I paid and took my bags, my hands sweating. As I turned to leave, I felt it. That crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I glanced back over my shoulder. The clerk was still staring at me. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, the heat hitting me hard. Even then, I didn't feel alone. I walked to my car with that same feeling following me. That night is when things really started to feel wrong. The sun went down, bleeding through the trees before the swamp swallowed it whole. Grandma went to bed early. She always did. I could hear her radio murmuring through the thin walls, gospel low enough to feel more like a hum than music. Outside, the cicadas had been loud all evening, screaming like they were trying to tear the night open. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to ignore how tight my chest felt. Then, all at once, the noise stopped. Not faded, not slowed down, just gone. I froze. I grew up in Louisiana. I knew the swamp never went quiet unless something was very wrong. Even the city had its sounds at night. Sirens, cars, people. Silence like that felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were shaking and I told myself it was just nerves. Long day. Not enough sleep. That's what city life teaches you to say when things don't make sense. I stepped out onto the deck for air. The moon was high, shining down on the water. The swamp looked flat and still, like black glass. No frogs, no insects, nothing moving. That's when I heard the whispering. It wasn't loud. It sounded like voices carried underwater, soft and layered, like a crowd speaking all at once but too far away to understand. My skin prickled. I turned around. They were standing at the edge of the yard, where the grass gave way to mud. At least 5 of them, maybe more. They wore old clothes, the kind you see in history books. Long coats, dresses hanging loose and heavy with wet. Everything about them was dark and soaked, like they had climbed straight out of the swamp. Their heads weren't human. Each one wore the rotted head of a gator, skin peeling, teeth showing through torn flesh. Mud dripped from their jaws. Around their necks, every single one of them wore the same pendant I had seen in the water, the same one the clerk had worn. It caught the moonlight and gleamed. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Then, all at once, they raised their arms and pointed at me. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in my bed like nothing had happened. Morning light was coming through the thin curtains, pale and gray. For a second, I thought maybe I was back home in the city. Then I heard the swamp, water shifting, a bird calling far off. The house creaking the way it always did. My clothes were dry. My body felt sore like I had slept wrong, but there was no mud, no water, no sign I had ever been outside. Grandma was already up. I could hear her in the kitchen moving slow, dishes clinking together. When I came out, she was standing at the sink, leaning heavy on the counter. "You up now?" she said without turning around. "Good. These joints ain't what they used to be." I took her place and started washing. The water was cold. Everything was too normal. I kept replaying the night in my head, every detail sharp like it had just happened. "I had a dream," I said finally. She hummed like she already knew. "A bad one," I added. "Real bad. Felt real." She didn't answer right away. I scrubbed a plate harder than I needed to. I told her about the silence, about the people. I didn't say gator heads at first, but the words came out anyway. I told her how they pointed at me, how I woke up shaking. She set a dish towel down slow and looked at me. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but sharp underneath. "Dreams don't always mean something," she said. I laughed a little, trying to shake it off. "I know, just saying it felt different, like it wasn't just in my head. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, something splashed in the water. Spirits got a way of speaking when they want to, she said softly. They don't always use words. I looked at her then. You saying that wasn't a dream? She shook her head just a little. I'm saying some things don't come for you until you step back where you belong to. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. She picked up her coffee and rolled herself toward the table, leaving the rest hanging in the air. I stood there with my hands in the sink, watching the water, wishing she'd just say it plain, but Grandma never did things that way, and somehow, that scared me more than if she had. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was standing just outside the house, waiting. Grandma's radio was off, which made it worse. I laid there listening to the water lap against the dock and the house creak, telling myself I was being stupid. Sometime after midnight I got up. I didn't have a plan. I just knew Grandma knew more than she was saying. The way she talked that morning, the way she cut herself off, it sat in my chest like a stone. Her room was dark, the door cracked open. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady. I stayed quiet and went into the small sitting room instead. She kept most of her things there. Old drawers, stacked boxes, nothing locked. I started with the dresser. Old letters folded so many times the paper was soft. Church programs, receipts. Normal stuff. Then I found the photo album. It was heavy, thick leather cover, worn smooth from hands. When I opened it, the first pages were what I expected. Black and white photos of family members smiling stiffly at the camera. Sunday clothes, front porches, names written in faded ink underneath. I turned the page. The clothes changed. Older now, dresses longer, men in suspenders. The dates written in the margins said early 1900s. My last name was still there. Same blood, same family. That's when I saw it. The pendant. One woman wore it around her neck, clear as day. On the next page, a man had it tucked into his shirt. Then another, and another. Every few pages, the same symbol showed up again, always close to the skin. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the back of the album. Tucked into the last pages were newspaper clippings. Yellowed, brittle, headlines about men found dead, names matching the ones in the photos. I didn't read too close. I didn't need to. I knew what they were talking about. My stomach turned. What are you doing in my things? I nearly dropped the album. Grandma was sitting up in bed, her robe hanging loose, her eyes sharp despite the hour. You know something, I said, my voice coming out rough. You've known something this whole time. She looked at the album in my hands, then back at my face, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Put that down, she said. No, I said, not this time. You need to tell me what this is. What's been happening to me? The room felt smaller then, like the walls were leaning in. Grandma stared at me for a long moment, fear flickering across her face before she hid it. Somewhere outside, the swamp shifted, slow and heavy. Grandma sat down hard in her chair like the truth weighed more than her bones. She didn't look at me at first. She just stared at the floor, hands folded tight in her lap. This was a long time ago, she said, back when the law didn't see us as nothing worth protecting. I didn't interrupt her. She continued. Our family lost 3 men and a little boy, she went on, taken right out the parish. Just hanging like warnings. Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers shook. It broke us. Folks were scared to leave the house, scared to speak too loud, scared to breathe wrong. She swallowed. One of the women back then, My grandmother, she couldn't live like that no more. So she went into the swamp, went where nobody else would. She prayed, but not to God alone. She asked anything that would listen to keep our blood safe. My mouth felt dry. And something answered, Grandma said. She finally looked at me then. It promised protection, said no more ropes, no more mobs, no more men taken before their time. But nothing comes free. That spirit wanted its due. I asked it before I could stop myself. What kind of due? I said, still confused. 100 years, she said. That's how long it would guard us. After that, the bargain was done. Whatever hunger it had would be loose again. The room felt cold. I thought about the dates in the album, about the way the figures had pointed at me. The people I saw, I said quietly. That was them? She nodded. Your ancestors. They stayed close to the water after death, watching, waiting, trying to warn you. My chest tightened. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to see you, she said. Wanted to have you here, safe, before the time was up. I didn't know it would come so soon. Her voice cracked just a little. I thought maybe the spirit would pass us by. Maybe it already took enough. Outside, something moved in the swamp, slow and heavy. Grandma reached for my hand, her grip weak but urgent. You need to understand, she said. The protection is gone now, and it knows your name. Grandma squeezed my hand hard, harder than I thought she could. You need to go, she said, right now. What? I said. No, I'm not leaving you here. Her eyes flashed at me. That thing is awake, she snapped, and it's hungry. My time's already done. I lived long. You ain't. I went to her chair, tried to push it back. I can get you in the car. We can... She interrupted me. Boy, she yelled, loud enough to make me flinch. Get the hell out of my house. I froze. I had never heard her raise her voice like that. Not once in my life. It wants the blood still walking, she said, breath shaking now. Not the ones already half gone. If you stay, it'll take you. If you don't, maybe it won't follow far. The house creaked. Something heavy shifted outside, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. Go, she said again, softer this time. Run. I grabbed my keys and didn't even think about shoes. I burst out onto the deck in my pajamas. The boards slick under my feet. The swamp was loud again, too loud, like it was breathing all around me. I ran. I'm not a runner. Never have been. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I didn't stop. I made it to my car, hands slipping as I yanked the door open. It started on the first try. I didn't look back. I drove too fast down the narrow road, trees whipping past. Then something jumped out in front of me. A deer, big, close. I swerved. The car slammed into a tree so hard my head rang. The engine is dead and smoking now. I've locked the doors. My hands are shaking like crazy. Now I'm sitting here and typing this while I still can. I don't know exactly where I am. Somewhere outside New Orleans. Deep in the bayou. My battery is low. I've got barely any service. I can hear it out there. A deep bellow rolling through the water. It's getting closer. I worked for the county, not as a dispatcher, but as one of those people who cleaned up recordings afterward. Training material, legal review, that kind of thing. Most calls never made it past the first pass. They were boring or redundant or too chaotic to be useful. Others stayed with me longer than they should have. You learn to compartmentalize. You have to. This one slipped through. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Residential. No address anomaly. No dropped signal. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, exactly how it should be. The caller was a woman, mid-30s, maybe older. Hard to tell. Her voice was steady in a way that didn't match what she was saying. "There's someone in my house," she said. The dispatcher followed protocol, asked for her address, confirmed it, asked if she was in immediate danger. "I don't think so," the woman said. "He's just standing there." "Standing where?" "In the hallway, outside my bedroom." The dispatcher asked if she could leave the room. "No." "Why not?" "Because he told me not to." There it was, the first thing that made me pause the audio. The dispatcher handled it well, asked for a description: male, average height, dark clothes, no visible weapon, not moving, just standing. Police were dispatched. ETA was 7 minutes. The dispatcher told the woman to stay on the line, lock the door if possible. "I already did," the woman said. "He unlocked it." That earned a note in the margin: possible hallucination, possible domestic situation, stress response. The dispatcher asked if the woman knew the man. "I don't think so," she said. Then after a beat, "He knows me." "How?" "He's using my name." The dispatcher asked her to whisper if she needed to. The woman said, "He says it doesn't matter." That was when the call quality changed. Not static, not interference. Just a subtle flattening of the sound, like the room had absorbed it. I remember leaning back in my chair when I first heard that part, rolling my shoulders, telling myself not to anthropomorphize audio. The dispatcher asked the woman to describe what the man was doing now. "He tilted his head," she said, "like he's listening to you." The dispatcher paused. You could hear it. Half a second too long. "Ma'am, is he speaking right now?" "No," the woman said, "but he's smiling." The dispatcher told her to keep her eyes on the door. "I don't have to," the woman said. "I can see his shadow under it." The dispatcher asked if there was any light on in the hallway. "No." Then how could she see the shadow? Another pause. "He's brighter than the dark," the woman said. That was where the training value dropped off. That line got the call flagged for psychological distress. I should have trimmed it there. I didn't. The dispatcher redirected, asked the woman to describe her surroundings, grounding techniques, breathe, name objects in the room. The woman complied: bed, dresser, lamp, phone. Then she stopped. "What is it?" the dispatcher asked. "He's closer," the woman said. "I didn't hear him move." The dispatcher told her officers were en route. "I know," the woman said. "He said they won't see him." The dispatcher asked her to clarify. "He said he's not here the way they're here." The sentence is underlined 3 times in my notes. The dispatcher asked the woman to keep talking. "I don't think I'm supposed to," she said. "He's asking why you are lying to me." The dispatcher assured her no one was lying. The woman laughed, a short sound, almost embarrassed. "He says you're very good at it," she said. At 2:23 a.m., the audio picked up a second voice. It was faint, not coming through the phone, coming through the room. I replayed that section dozens of times. Checked waveforms, compared channels. It was there. A man's voice, low and unhurried. "That's not true," it said. The dispatcher reacted immediately, asked who else was in the room. The woman didn't answer. Instead, the man spoke again, clearer this time. "You shouldn't have told her to lock the door." The dispatcher called for backup. Her voice stayed level, but it tightened. "Ma'am, if you can hear me, please respond." "She can hear you," the man said. "She just doesn't know which of us to answer." The woman started crying then, quietly, like she was trying not to be rude. "I don't want to make him mad," she said. The dispatcher asked who he was. "I asked her not to explain me," the man said. "It never goes well." The dispatcher told the woman to leave the phone on and exit through the window if possible. There was a sound then, fabric shifting, footsteps, not hurried. "No," the man said, not raised, not threatening, just firm. "We're almost done." The dispatcher said officers were on the streets. "I know," the man said. "I can hear them thinking." The woman made a small noise, like surprise. "He's right," she said. "They're scared." The dispatcher asked the woman to focus on her voice. "Which one?" the woman asked. That was the last thing she said. The call ended at 2:26 a.m. Abrupt disconnect. No struggle sounds, no scream, just silence. The police report came in later that morning. Officers arrived to find the house empty, front door unlocked, bedroom undisturbed, phone on the bed, screen cracked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no signs of exit. The woman had no history of mental illness, no domestic partner, no neighbors reported seeing anyone leave. The case was marked unresolved. I edited the call down to 6 minutes, removed the second voice, cut the stranger references, left it as a textbook example of a perceived intruder with dissociative features. That is what I told myself. 2 months later, I got a call from my supervisor, asked if I had worked on file 17-0426. I said yes. She asked why my name was spoken on the recording. I didn't understand. She played it for me, a version I had never heard. Same call, same timestamps, same voices. Except this time, when the man spoke for the first time, he said my name. Not shouted, not emphasized, like it was obvious. "That's not true, Esha," he said. I told my supervisor it must have been contamination, audio bleed, suggestibility. She nodded. She looked tired. She asked me to listen to one more thing. A new call taken that morning. Different dispatcher, different address. A man on the line this time. "There's someone in my house," he said. The dispatcher asked for his name. He gave it. Then he said, "He's telling me you already know this part." The attic had been leaking for a few days now, and I had been up to my wits' end about it. Elizabeth told me to call a contractor, but I knew I was perfectly capable of fixing it. We had been warned the house would be a fixer-upper, but with a baby on the way and our budgets being tight, I told her that I was up to the task of converting this small country house into our cozy nest that we had always dreamed of. She was mostly on board to get out of the city, and I needed a project to work on at the time. We have been living here for about 2 years now, and suddenly the attic decided to leak. I had fixed most of the electrical and plumbing in the house already, so I assumed that either a critter had gotten up there and the recent rain had come through, or I hadn't tightened a pipe or sealed it properly. I grabbed my ladder and my toolbox and went up the rickety wooden stairs into the attic. By all accounts, the attic itself made no sense. The house was a small 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, a decent-sized living room, and a small kitchen, as if built to fit into an apartment. The house wasn't 2 stories tall. It just had an attic that you could squat in. Why someone who lived in a house this size would need an attic? I have no clue, but I have to admit that it was nice to have. As I used my flashlight around the stuffy attic, I saw the boxes of holiday decor and baby toys we had been given for Jameson, so that he would have some when he got older. Grandparents, am I right? But then I saw something shift behind a wooden horse. I dragged myself up into the attic, and I moved myself about as I came closer to the spot. I felt it first, before the smell hit my nostrils. Wet, puffy, wrinkled, the smell of dead things. Things that had been sitting in here for a long time. I swung the flashlight to what my other hand had touched, and that is when I realized what it was. The eyes had burst from when I shifted my weight onto the hand. The skull flattened and the neck had an impression of my pinky finger on it. I couldn't immediately identify it, but from what I could tell, it must have been a really decayed raccoon or cat. What made it even more difficult was the lack of fur or any other identifying features. It seemed to have 4 legs, but the paws were a little longer, and it had tiny fingers that resembled human hands. The tail seemed malformed, as it looked like it had grown with a bend in it, like an elbow. The end of the tail had some form of claw on the end, but it could have been a malformed bone. The head was mush, so I'm assuming it was a raccoon. Of course, at the time, I was more concerned about vomiting on my favorite work shirt. I quickly crawled out of the attic and ran into the bathroom to wash off the greasy guts on my left hand and change shirts. I then grabbed a few plastic bags and some gloves from the kitchen before trekking back up there to clean it out. After a few trips and burning through cleaning supplies, I had removed the dead critter and any fluids up there. My focus was off, as my hands had broken out into hives and sores. Elizabeth told me I should go see the doctor, but I told her, I'll wait a day or two first. As I scrubbed the hives on my hand, I stared at the creature's hands and tail, how they were twisted with claws as if human. I didn't tell her about how misshapen the creature was, as the problems of the attic were mine. I assumed the critter had somehow crawled up the tree in our backyard and found a hole beneath the roof or behind a gutter, but there was no hole to be found. I emptied the attic and searched every nook and cranny. The leak was definitely coming from where the critter's body had lain, but the attic refused to reveal its exit. It was almost as if the creature had been a plug, but there would still have to be a hole, right? Elizabeth asked me if the leaking could have been the critter pissing on the attic floor, but I told her that the attic only leaked when it had rained, and we would have smelled it. The next day, I had a hard time getting up and continuing the search for the leaking gap. I hadn't slept well, in all honesty, because I had a really weird dream about something outside the bedroom window calling out a name. It doesn't matter, though. Dreams are weird, right? But I do have the name stuck in my head now. I ended up muttering it to myself all day, and I didn't even realize it until Elizabeth asked me what I was saying. I wasn't sure myself, and I hadn't even realized that I was staring out the window while I was muttering. 2 nights ago, things started to change. I had gotten up late that night, waking up from a nightmare, if you must know, and I decided to refill my cup of water. I tiptoed out of the bedroom so as to not wake Elizabeth and went into the kitchen. As I flipped on the light, I almost jumped when I saw a silhouette from the kitchen window. I had just woken up from a dream about something coming in from the window, so you can understand why I was jumpy. I then rubbed my eyes and saw that it was an ooze, leaking from the kitchen ceiling and down the window panel. Thunder roared and lightning flashed outside, highlighting the translucent fluid. It couldn't have been there for more than a few minutes, as the crack in the ceiling looked as if it had only just started taking water damage. I took my empty cup and scooped some of it off the window before it reached the sink, then placed it on the counter. I then spent the next 10 minutes digging around for a bucket and a towel as quietly as I could, and cleaned up as much as possible. Being quite tired from horrible dreams, I absentmindedly grabbed my cup and brought it back to bed with me, thinking I had filled it with water. As the fluid touched my tongue, I realized my mistake, but it was too late. It filled my mouth and ran down my throat as I tried to spit it out. As I gagged and coughed, Elizabeth woke up and asked what was wrong. I told her what happened and she handed me her water. I ended up going to the bathroom and washing my mouth out for a while before finally falling asleep, exhausted. I awoke to a sore throat and a grumpy wife. She said that I had been muttering in my sleep all night, something about somebody arriving. I didn't have a clue what she could have been talking about, so I apologized. After coming home from work, I used my ladder to seal up the cracking ceiling in the kitchen, then went back into the attic. It felt smaller than before, but a lack of sleep was affecting my senses for most of the day. A coworker had poured some water on my lap to wake me up, as I had fallen asleep muttering, so the dimensions of the attic feeling off didn't concern me. What did concern me was that I couldn't find the source of the ooze. The only thing that stuck out was an outline of where the critter had been found, had stained the wood flooring, but that was something I couldn't scrub out. The wife told me I should call pest control or a professional, but I quickly snapped back that I was perfectly capable of fixing anything wrong in the attic, and that I was the only one who could prepare it. I must have said it more aggressively than I intended, because she said that she was going to take our son with her to her mother's house, and that I had been acting strange for the past few days. She claimed that I had been sleepwalking, muttering the same name over and over while opening windows at night, and had become distant. I told her it was just nightmares and that I was fine. I was just stressed because I had a job to do, and if she couldn't understand that, then she should just leave. I haven't seen her for 2 days now, or our son Jameson, I think. Not that it matters now. She wouldn't understand even if I tried to explain it to her. I love her, but I had to fix the leak. I haven't left the house since. My boss called, but I told him I had more important things to do than filling out paperwork, then hung up. But I finally found the leak. That attic thought it could hide it from me, but I found it. At this point, my skin is puffy and red, with dried blood from sores and cracked skin across my arms. I haven't been able to speak. My jaw feels so swollen. Moving or breathing hurts, so I have spent the past few hours sitting in the attic alone. The ooze wasn't just a leak, but rather a gift. He had tried to tell me before, but I didn't understand. As his arms crawl within me, I feel brimming with joy. I finally fixed the leak as I drank what was left of the divine essence. He now dwells within me, reaching out from my throat and peeling away my skin. He has arrived, and we are born again in one form, as I am torn apart from the inside. A cocoon for my Lord of Shagai. It's been 2 weeks since my van got totaled. I'm not gonna lie, that set me back. I'd been sleeping in the rear compartment. Don't feel sorry for me. I'm the idiot who crashed it. After the accident, I had nowhere to sleep. Motel rates were double what I could afford, so I bought a cheap tent from BFC and hitched back to the lot where I used to park. I ended up in a flat section of woods by the Tukey River, past the McDonald's on Ambridge Street. It felt private without being secluded. There were public restrooms a short walk away, a 24-hour 7-Eleven, and just enough light from the nearby car park to make me feel like I wasn't completely alone. 2 days in, dead in the middle of the night, I heard a shrill scream, like a hunter gutting a deer, only to find that it survived the initial buckshot. I wound up my hand-charged flashlight and exited the tent, aiming it from bushes to branches, and to the endless black that swallowed the gaps between the trees. The woods stayed silent after that. Even the buzz of mosquitoes disappeared, but I stayed awake in my tent for an hour or so, straining my ears to hear what sounded like leaves crackling underfoot. The next morning, as I was washing my work shirts in the Tukey River, a pink and gray sneaker washed ashore, caught in the reeds that lined the bank. I retrieved it and read the tag on the inside of the tongue. Woman's size 9. Lots of things washed up in the river. Shoes, clothes, cardboard boxes, and cartons of milk. I tossed the shoe back, thinking it was another piece of junk. Later that night, I was eating a Big Mac from the Ambridge Street McDonald's, hugging my knees to my chest and trying to keep warm. Outside, the leaves began crunching again. I thought maybe a deer had smelt my food or noticed my camping light and came to investigate. I unzipped my tent and went walking into the woods following the sound. Whatever made the sound wasn't disturbed by my movement and kept creeping from tree to tree. My torch light started to stutter, and I stopped to wind the lever and boost the charge. The light turned back on. Ahead of me, something ducked behind a tree. I froze, aiming the flashlight where I'd seen the face. An animal would have scurried away, dashed off into the thickets to escape the human presence. The light started flicking again. I tilted it down to wind the lever. Footsteps, disguising themselves amongst the click, click, click of the wind-up torch. I turned on my feet, sliding on the loose leaves, the torch tumbling from my grip, and I zigzagged between trees and rocks, sprinting back to the tent. I zipped myself inside and waited. I had no tools, no bear spray, no torch, nothing to defend myself with. I switched off the camping light and sat in the darkness, letting my ears work to their full breath. The night went silent again, as still as the surface of water. No bugs, not even the crunch of leaves. Nothing, except for one sound. Wind blowing gently against my tent. Breathing. When I got home tonight, something was off. Not wrong exactly, just off. You know how sometimes you can walk into a room you've been in 1,000 times before and suddenly everything feels slightly tilted, like reality's holding its breath? That's what it was like. The air was too still. The light seemed a bit duller, even though the bulbs were the same. I live alone, 1-bedroom apartment, 2nd floor. Nothing fancy. I jiggled the key, stepped inside, and immediately froze. It smelled different. My place normally smells faintly of coffee and dust, and the citrus cleaner I use on weekends. Tonight it smelled faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd forgotten to take the trash out, but when I closed the door, the sound was wrong. The latch clicked, but it sounded deeper, heavier, like the door was thicker than before. I remember thinking, this isn't my door. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. It was the same model, cheap black plastic, but the hands were moving backwards. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, because that made no sense. I thought maybe I was just exhausted, but then my laughter stopped when I saw my coat hanging by the door. I don't own that coat. It looked like mine, navy blue, hooded, but it had a rip across the shoulder and a stain I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time. I even reached out and touched it. It was still damp, like someone had just come in from the rain. Except it wasn't raining. I backed up, heart thudding, and that's when I heard footsteps in the bedroom. Slow, measured, heavy. I should have left. I wanted to leave, but something in me wanted to see who or what was in there. I picked up the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, my umbrella, and pushed the door open. The light was on. My bed was perfectly made, and sitting on the edge of it was me. Same clothes, same face, same cut on my hand from when I broke a glass last night. Only this version of me smiled when I entered. "Long day?" he asked. His voice sounded like mine, but lower, slower, like he'd been practicing. I didn't answer. I just stared. He stood up and I realized he was taller by maybe half an inch. His eyes were darker, and then I saw something else. Behind him, through the open closet door, was another apartment. An identical one. The same furniture, the same bed, except empty. He noticed me looking. "You weren't supposed to come back so soon," he said. That's when I ran. I bolted out of the apartment, down the hall and into the stairwell. I didn't stop until I was outside in the cold air, my hands shaking so hard I dropped my keys. I called the police, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. What do you say? There's another me in my apartment that smells wrong? They came, looked around, found nothing. Everything was normal. My coat, the one with the rip, was gone. The clock was ticking the right way again. I'm staying at a motel tonight. I don't know what's waiting for me if I go back tomorrow. But here's the thing. When I was checking in just now, I caught my reflection in the glass door. And for a split second, I swear, my reflection smiled before I did.